Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Lamed, Daf 30 of Masechta Megilla. Friends, Daf Lamed, we're just going to kind of keep discussing the four special parshas, which are Parshas Shkolim, Parshas Zohar, Parshas Parah, and Parshas HaChodesh. Friends, so let's jump in. We're going to start over here on two lines from the bottom of Dav Chavtes Beis. Itmar, we stated Chalios beva'ata tetzave. All right. So if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out and it's Parshas Va'ata tetzave, so Amar Yitzchak Nafcha. So says of Yitzchak Nafcha, Kaushisa meva'ata tetzave. Okay. So of course on Shabbos there are 7 aliyahs. So Yitzchak Nafcha says what you do is the first 6 aliyahs. So you read from Parshas Tetzave, alright, fine, Ad Kisisa, until you get to Parshas Kisisa, which of course is what we have to read for Parshas Shkolim. V'chad Mechitisa Ad Ve'asisa, alright, and then the 7th aliyah is going to be for Shkolim, excuse me, is going to be Parshas Shkolim, right? So basically if that week's Parsha is Parshas Tetzave, which is a Parsha right before Parshas Kisisa, which is what we read for Parshas Shkolim, so just, read the first 6 aliyahs of the day, Parshas Tetzave, and then you'll have the 7th aliyah, and you'll go right into Parshas Kisisa. Abaye says, Abaye, Amrei, Ukume, Hu, Mukame, awesome. Says Abaye, it's not clear enough that the reason why you're reading Kisisa is because it's Parshas Shkolim. People might think that, it goes right, it's just, they're just reading straight from the Torah. It's just going right into the other. We're not reading Kisisa right now because it's Parshas Shkolim. We're just reading Kisisa because it's a continuation of Tetzaveh. Rather, Abaye suggests, Karushisa mivata Tetzaveh ad ve'asisa. No, rather what you should do is the first 6 aliyahs should be from the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh right through the end of what you would read for Parshas Shkolim in Parshas Kisisa. V'chad toni v'kar mechisisa v'ad ve'asisa. And then the 7th aliyah, you then go back to the beginning of Parshas Kisisa, and you read from the beginning of Parshas Kisisa until ve'asisa, until the end of what you would read for Parshas Shkolim. And by doing that, by sort of reading till the end of Parshas Shkolim, and then going backwards and reading the Parshas Shkolim portion again, then it's clear that the reason why you're going back and reading it is because it's Taka Parshas Shkolim. Meisvei vitaka avakasha. Chalios b'Shabbos b'Parsha asmucha lo. So if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on the Parsha that is close to Parshas Shkolim, beimil fanei beimil acharei, whether it's the Parsha before Parshas Kisisa, or whether it's the Parsha after Parshas Kisisa, kain osa v'choflin osa. So we read it and then we double it. So b'shlamula Abaye nicha. So I understand according to Abaye, because Abaye just said that when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Tetzaveh, which is the week before Shkolim, right, which is the week before Kisisa, the Parsha before Kisisa, so then says Abaye, you read Parshas Tetzaveh through the end of what you would read for Shkolim, and then you go back and a second time you read the Parshas Shkolim portion, right? So therefore, when this brisa says Korn Osa v'Choflin Osa, you read it and double it. So then that sounds like what Abaye is saying. Say read it and then read it again. So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha kasha. According to Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, you're not reading anything twice. You're just reading the first 6 aliyahs from Tetzaveh, and the 7th aliyah is Kisisa for Shkolim. So Amalach Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Abaye minicho. Now Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha will say to you, but who says it's any better for Abaye? Teinach lefanel. So that's all fine and good when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on the Parsha prior to Kisisa, i.e. Parshas Tetzaveh. So Abaye said, sure, you read till the end of what you would read for Shkolim, and then you repeat the last part. But what does Abaye then say about when it says that also if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on the Parsha after what you would read for Kisisa, i.e. for shkalim. I don't know what comes after that. Vayakel, I guess. Right? Tuma tetzave kisisa vayakel. So then, according to Abaye, then what's the repetition there? So what do you have to say? Kofli b'shabasos. Hachanami kofli b'shabasos. No, what it means is that you're going to be doubling it in terms of Shabbos. That you're going to be reading. In that case kisisa twice, because you're going to be reading kisisa in the context of Parsha Shkalim, but also kisisa in the context of Parshas Kisisa, when you read Parshas Kisisa. So Achanami Kofel b'Shabbosos. So therefore, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha says that both when it means that you repeat it on two Shabboses, but it's not necessarily giving support for Abaye's opinion, right? Meaning, Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha would say that he would maintain that when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Parshas Tetzaveh, so you read the first 6 aliyahs from Tetzaveh, the 7th aliyah is Kisisa, and then the next Shabbos, which is Parshas Kisisa, so then you read Parshas Kisisa, and you can read it 2 Shabbos in a row. Fine. And the same thing would happen if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out the Shabbos after Kisisa, which is Tetzaveh, so again, you can read it Kisisa twice in a row, right? Once for Parshas Kisisa, and then once as part of Parshas Shkalim. Cholios b'Chisisa atzma. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out, and it happens to be Parshas Kisisa that week, so Omer Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Karushisa min ve'asisa ad vayakol, v'chad kar michisisa ad ve'asisa. So says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha that your shtick will go out of order. That the first 6 aliyahs, right, basically you skip the first aliyah and you start reading Parshas Kisisa at the second aliyah, and then the first 6 aliyahs are from that point until the end of the parsha, and then V'chad kar michisisa ad ve'asisa. And then, says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, the 7th aliyah goes back to the beginning of Parshas Kisisa and basically reads the first aliyah. And that way it's clear that the reason why you're reading that aliyah is not because it's Parshas Kisisa, but because it's Parshas Shkalim. Maskif lo Abaye, but Abaye taka as a kasha. Hashta amilu mafreu udikari. But then they're going to say, wait, what's going on? You taka reading out of order. Reading out of order. So rather, says Abaye, Kru Shisa ad Vayakel V'chad Toni Vikari Michisisa Vad Vasisa. So rather, says Abaye, what you should do is you start from the beginning of Parshas Kisisa. And the first 6 aliyahs are from the beginning of Parshas Kisisa until the end of the Parsha. And then the 7th aliyah is you go back and then and you read the first aliyah from the beginning until the end of what you need to read for Parshas Shkalim. Tani Kavos da Abaye, Takav Abaye supporting Abaye, Chalios b'Chisisa Atzma, that when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out and it's Parshas Kisisa, Kohen Osa b'Chofen Osa, you read it and then you repeat it. So, i.e., you read from the beginning of Parshas Kisisa until the end of the Parsha, and then you go back and you read the first section again for Parshas Shkalim. Chalios b'Soch HaShabbos Makdim L'Shabbos She'ovra. So the Mishnah had said that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the middle of the week, so then you read Parshas Shkalim the week before, the Shabbos before. Itmar. Okay, so it's Taka stage. Rosh Chodesh Adar Chalios b'Erev Shabbos. That when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday. Alright? Rav Amar Makdimin. So Rav says, okay, well, if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday, so when's Parshas Shkalim? The Shabbos before. Ushmuel Amar Ma'achrin. Where Shmuel says, no, actually, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday, when's Parshas Shkalim? The day after Rosh Chodesh, the next day, which is Shabbos. Rav Amar Makdimin. Rav says that you do Parshas Shkalim the week before, the Shabbos before, the Imkain, Batzri Lihu Yimei Shulchanis. Because Rav says, look, right, we had said yesterday that the reason why we read Parshas Shkalim on Rosh Chodesh Adar is because it gives us 2 weeks before the money changers set up shop to, in preparation for the Machzis HaShekel. and Rav argues that if, based on what Shmuel is saying, that you're really only going to get to Parsha Shkolim on the second day of Adar, well then it's less than 2 weeks before the money changers need to start setting up on the 15th of Adar. Where Shmuel will reply, Me'achrin, that you can read Parsha Shkolim the next day on Shabbos, which is the second day of Adar. Shmuel says yes, but practically speaking, when is the 15th of Adar going to be? On a Friday. And the money changers are not going to be setting up shop on Erev Shabbos, because out of honor of Shabbos, there's other things to do. So therefore, Memela, and obviously they're not going to be open for business on Shabbos either. So Memela, they're only going to be setting up on Sunday anyways. So you're still, practically speaking, going to have 2 weeks before the money changes are setting up. Hilkoch Ma'achrin, therefore, says Shmuel, you can push off Parsha Shkolim until the next day, which is Shabbos. Tanan, we learn in the Mishnah, Chalios Besoch HaShabbos, that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the middle of Shabbos, Magdim in the Shavar, so you do Parsha Shkolim the previous Shabbos. Mafsik in the Shabbos Acheres, and then the next Shabbos there's no special Parsha. My love, Afilu B'Erev Shabbos. And we want to say that includes even when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Erev Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh falls out at any time during the week, so then Parsha Shkolim is the previous Shabbos, including if it falls out on Friday. Lo B'Soch HaShabbos Davka. So Shmuel would answer and say no. It means Davka, if Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, but not on an Erev Shabbos. Erev Shabbos is a different thing. Alright. Tashma coming here. Eizuhi Shabbos Rishona. So what is the first Shabbos? So Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Adar Lios Bisocha. Vafilu B'Erev Shabbos. So we have this brayso that says Eizuhi Shabbos Rishona. What's the first of these Shabboses, right? Pashas Shkolim, Pashas Zochor, Pashas Parah, Pashas Chodesh. So what's the first one? Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Adar Lios Bisocha. The first one is the one that Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in it. Vafilu B'Erev Shabbos, and even if it falls out on Erev Shabbos. So there you have it. A brayso that's saying that even when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Erev Shabbos, so it's going to be the previous Shabbos that you're reading Parshas Shkolim. So my love, Afilu B'Erev Shabbos Dumya de Tocha. Now we're saying that Erev Shabbos is just like the rest of the middle of the week, right? Ma Tocha Magdimin, Erev Shabbos Magdimin. That just like when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the middle of the week, so Parshas Shkolim is the previous Shabbos. So also when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Friday, Parshas Shkolim is the previous Shabbos. Amar Shmuel, bah. So Shmuel says no. You have to read the brayso differently. Instead of reading it Eizuhi Shabbos Rishona Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Adar Lios Bisocha, no, it means what's the first Shabbos? Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Adar Lios Ba. That if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, so then that is going to be Parshas Shkolim. When it says V'chein B'Erev Shabbos, also if Rosh Chodesh Adar was the day before, so then also that would be the first Shabbos, i.e., when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, so then that Shabbos is Parshas Shkolim, and even if it falls out on Erev Shabbos, so then the next day would be Parshas Shkolim. V'chein Tana Devei Shmuel, and also it's taught in the Beis Medrash of Shmuel, Ba, that Davka, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, that is when it's Parshas Shkolim, and also if Erev Shabbos, so then it would be the next day as well, not the previous Shabbos. Ketanoi, like we learned, it's like a machlokas tanoim. Misargin the Shabbosos Divrei Rabbi Yehuda Hanosi Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Ein Misargin that we do not skip. The Rabbi Yehuda Hanosi says that we don't skip any Shabbos between Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Zochor. and Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says ein misargin. So Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that we do skip, and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that we do not skip any Shabbos between Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Zachor. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, and says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Imosei ani omer ein misargin. When do I say that there's no skipping? Bisman Shcholios be'erev Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Erev Shabbos. Aval Bisman Shcholios besocha Shabbos maktim v'korim Shabbos shava afal pi shehu Shvat. But if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the middle of the week, then you'll do it the previous week. Meaning, so Rabbi Yehuda Nasi says that you skip a Shabbos, that you'll basically read Parshas Shkolim, then you'll have one Shabbos without any special Parsha, and then the next Shabbos is Parshas Zachor. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that you do not skip. And Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says that when is that specifically? It's specifically when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday, so then you do, like Shmuel says, Parshas Shkolim the next day. So, which is the second day of Adar, which means that the next Shabbos, which is the 9th day of Adar, is the Shabbos before Purim, which is the 14th day of Adar. So, in that case, you're going to go, you're going to have Parshas Shkolim, right, the day after Rosh Chodesh, and then immediately the next week is going to be Parshas Zachor. However, Shimon ben Elazar does agree that if Rosh Chodesh falls out in the middle of the week, let's say on a Wednesday, so then Parshas Shkolim would be the previous week, in which case there would be a space, there would be a gap without any special Shabbos. And he says even afal pi shehu Shvat, even though like if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Wednesday, so Memele when you read Parshas Shkolim the Shabbos before, it's still going to be Shvat because it's Shvat until Rosh Chodesh Adar. But nonetheless, you're going to read Parshas Shkolim the previous Shabbos. All right. Vashniya Zachor. So the Mishnah had said that the next special parsha is Parshas Zachor, which we read, right? We talk about Amalek. We read it right before Purim. Itmar. All right, it was stated. Purim Shcholios be'erev Shabbos. All right. So if you have Purim that falls out on a Friday, Rav Omar Magdimin Parshas Zachor, Shmuel Amar Ma'achrin. All right. So when you have Purim that falls out on a Friday, so Rav says, when's Parshas Zachor? The previous Shabbos. Shmuel says no, Parshas Zachor is the next day. So Purim is on Friday, Parshas Zachor, right? The 14th of Adar is on Friday. Shmuel says Parshas Zachor is the day after, on Shabbos. Rav Makdimin says Rav that Parshas Zachor is the previous Shabbos, so that you shouldn't have the doing of Purim before the mentioning of Amalek. That needs to happen first on the previous Shabbos. Shmuel Amar Me'achrin. Shmuel says that Parshas Zachor is the next day. Amalach will say to you, "Kem di'ikum ukafin davde b'chameisar." Well, since the next day is going to be the 15th, and 15th is Purim for the walled cities. So you actually have the mentioning of Amalek and the doing of the Purim on the same day, even though of course you wouldn't actually celebrate Purim on Shabbos, but says Shmuel that nonetheless, since the next day isn't necessarily too late, right? It is the 15th, which is Purim in the walled cities, so therefore it would be considered like the doing and the mentioning is all coming together. Ki asyon they're coming together. Tanan, we learned in our Mishnah Bashniya Zachor that the second parsha is Parshas Zachor. Vaki Mikla Rish Yarcha b'Shabbos, but when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, Mikla Purim be'erev Shabbos, Vikatoni b'Shniya Zachor. So the assumption is right now in the Gemara that it's referring to when Rosh Chodesh Adar fell out on Shabbos. And therefore, if Rosh Chodesh Adar fell out on Shabbos, so then the first day of Adar is Parshas Shkolim. And that means, and we're saying Bashniya, right, what do we say? Right, we said Tanan Bashniya Zachor, and that the second week is going to be Parshas Zachor, which is the 8th of Adar. And when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, i.e. the first day of Adar is on a Shabbos, So then when's Purim? When's the 14th day? On Erev Shabbos, right? If Rosh Chodesh Adar is on a Shabbos, and 2 weeks later is going to be the 15th, which is also Shabbos, which means the 14th is the day before an Erev Shabbos, and we're saying that week 1 is Parsha Shkalim, and week 2 is Parsha Zachor, which seems to be right, which seems to be a proof to say that even when Purim falls out on Erev Shabbos, Parsha Zachor is going to be the previous week. Amar Papa says, Lav Davka, my Shnia Lav Sucker, excuse me. What you could say is that it means the second since the break. I.e., Shmuel would say that you read Parsha Zachor the day after Purim, and when it means that on the second week is Parsha Zachor, it doesn't mean the second week since Rosh Chodesh Adar, it means the second week since when there was a break, i.e., Rosh Chodesh Adar would be Shkalim, the next week there would not be any special Parsha, and then the next week would be Parshas Zachor. Tashma coming here, Ezo Shabbos Shnia, what is the second Shabbos? Kol Shechol Purim Leos Bisocha, the week that Purim falls out in it. Okay, that when do you read Parshas Zachor? You read Parshas Zachor on the week that Purim falls out in it. Vafilu be'erev Shabbos, and even if it's on Erev Shabbos. So my love, so what does this mean? Erev Shabbos Dumei D'Tocha, that we're comparing Erev Shabbos to any other day that Purim falls out, any other day of the week that Purim falls out. Matocha Makdim, and Erev Shabbos Makdim, that just like when Purim falls out in the middle of the week, so when's Parshas Zachor? It's the Shabbos before. So Memele, when Purim falls out on Erev Shabbos as well, on a Friday, so when do you read Parshas Zachor? The previous Shabbos. So Omer Shmuel Ba, V'chintana Devei Shmuel Ba, that no, it says Shmuel, you have to read the Brisa a little bit differently. It's Ezo Shabbos Shnia Kol Shechol Purim Lios Ba, that if Purim falls out on Shabbos itself, so then you would read so then you would read Parshas Zachor on that Shabbos, and also if Purim falls out the day before on Erev Shabbos, you would read Parshas Zachor the next day on Shabbos. That is what Shmuel would say. Chalios b'Shabbos atzma, says the Gemara, that if Purim falls out on Shabbos itself, Amr Rav Huna, l'divrei kol makdim. So Rav Huna says, in that case, everyone would agree that you would read Parshas Zachor on that day. You would not read it the previous Shabbos. For Rav Nachman Amar, whereas Rav Nachman argues, and he says, Adaidi machlokas. No, it's actually still the same machlokas. Rav would still say that you would read Parshas Zachor the previous Shabbos to make sure that the mentioning of Amalek comes before the doing of Purim. It Manami was also stated, Amr B'chir Bar Abba, Amr Reb Abba, Amr Rab, Purim Shchalios b'Shabbos, that if Purim falls out on Shabbos, Maktin V'koy b'Shabbos Sha'av Zachor, you would read Parshas Zachor on the previous Shabbos. So we see that even when Purim falls out on Shabbos, it's still that same machlokas. The Mishnah said, Bashlishis Para Aduma. So the third of the special Parshas is Parshas Para. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Ezui Shabbos Shlishis, what's the third Shabbos? Kol Shesmucha, the Purim, Me'achareh. Okay, what's the Parshas Para? Parshas Para is the Shabbos after Purim. Itmar was stated, Reb Chama Reb Chanina Omer, it says Reb Chama Reb Chanina, Shabbos Asmucha Rosh Chodesh Nisan. It's the Shabbos that's closest to Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Philo Plige, and actually they're not arguing, it just depends. Hadikla Rosh Chodesh Nisan b'Shabbos, Hadikla be'emtza Shabbos. That it just depends when Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out. That if Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Shabbos, so then you'll read Parshas HaChodesh on that Shabbos, and then Parshas Parah would be the Shabbos before that, even though it wouldn't necessarily be the Shabbos right after Purim. Now, if Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out in the middle of the week, so then Parshas HaChodesh is going to be the Shabbos before that, which means that Parshas Parah is going to be the Shabbos before that, which means that it's going to be the Shabbos right after Purim. So it just depends on the year. Alright. Baravias HaChodesh Elochem, and on the fourth of the special Shabbos is Parshas HaChodesh. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Rosh Chodesh Adar Shchalios b'Shabbos, that if Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, Korin Kisisa So we read the Kisisa, which is Parsha Shkalim, Maftirin B'Yo Yoda, and the Haftorah is Yo Yoda. Ve'ezu Shabbos Rishona, and what is the first Shabbos? Koshcho Rosh Chodesh Adar Lios B'Socha, the week that Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out in the middle. Va'afilu B'Erev Shabbos, even on Erev Shabbos, like we learned earlier. V'Shnia Zachor, that the second Shabbos is Parsha Zachor, Maftirin Pakadti, and we have the Haftorah of by Shmuel, right? That God and Shaul, that remembering about Amalek. Ve'ezu Shabbos Shnia, what's the second week? Kol Shechal Purim Lios B'Socha. It's the week that Purim falls out in the middle of it. Va'afilu B'Erev Shabbos, even if Purim falls out on Erev Shabbos. B'Shlishi Par Aduma. The third Parsha is Parshas Parah, Maftirin V'Zarakti Aleichem. All right, and we read in Haftorah about throwing water and purifying waters. All right. Ve'ezu Shabbos Shlishis. What's considered the third week? Kol Shesmucha LePurim Me'acharel. It's the Shabbos that is that follows Purim. Parvias Achodesh Hazeh, and the fourth of these special Shabbos is Parshas Achodesh. Umaftirin Ko Omer Hashem Elokim Barishim Be'echad Achodesh. Okay, and that is the Haftorah that we read on Parshas Achodesh. Ve'ezu Shabbos Revius, and what's considered the fourth week? Kol Shechol Rosh Chodesh Nisan Lios B'Socha. It's the week that Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out in that week. Va'afilu B'Erev Shabbos, even if Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out on Erev Shabbos. Alright, fine. So it's the week that Rosh Chodesh Nisan falls out in, even Erev Shabbos. Fine. And then when it comes to the fifth week, so then everything just kind of goes back to normal. Okay, L'seder Mai. What do you mean that everything goes back to normal? What aspect goes back to normal? So Rabbi Ami Omer L'seder Parshas Suchozer, Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer L'seder Haftarah Suchozer. So it's machlokas between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Ami says that, well, during these 4 weeks, actually the Parshas were interrupted. Okay, of course, we nowadays are used to, no, these are just like different maftirs, right? So we read the Parshas HaShavua, and then the regular Parsha, and then the maftir will be, Parshas Shkalim, Zachor, etc. But according to Rabbi Ami, actually, the regular reading of the weekly Parsha was interrupted during these 4 weeks, kind of like, on Chol HaMoed, like when Shabbos Chol HaMoed, for example, you don't read the Parshas HaShavua, you read something else. No, I'm sorry, not Shabbos Chol HaMoed. When Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, so you don't read the regular Parshas HaShavua, you read something else. So here also, during these 4 Parshas, the Parshas HaShavua actually gets interrupted. Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer L'seder Haftarah Suchozer. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, no, we just have different maftir, a different Haftorah, we read something different from the Navi, but the Parshas HaShavua remains intact. And that's what you go back to, right? You go back to the normal Haftorahs. So again, the Seder Mai, to which order are we going back to? Rabbi Ami Omer says, Rabbi Ami, the Seder Parshas Suchozer. He goes back. So it says Rabbi Ami that the Parshas HaShavua, the weekly Torah portion, was interrupted during these 4 weeks. And now you go back to the normal portions. Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer, whereas Rabbi Yirmiyah says, the Seder Haftarah Suchozer, that no, the weekly portions remained intact. It's just that he goes back to the haftarah, to the navi, to the regular maftirs and haftarahs. Amar Abai says, Abai kavasu de Rabbi Ami mistava, that it says Abai Taka makes sense like Rabbi Ami, that we actually interrupted the weekly portions during these weeks. The Tananas we learned in our Mishnah, Lakol mafsikin Rosh Chodashim l'Chanukah l'Purim, that we interrupt for all sorts of things, for Rosh Chodesh, for Chanukah, for Purim, the Tanios, Ulamamados, and Tainuses and Maimids, Uliyom Kippurim and Yom Kippur. B'Shamal Man Amar L'Seder Parshas Suchozer. So Hanudika Parsha B'Chol. So I understand, according to the Man Amar who says, Rabbi Ami, who says that you go back to the regular Parshas. So Hanudika Parsha B'Chol. Right? The Tainios and the Mamados, those were during the week. Right? They weren't on Shabbos. And in those cases, so what are we interrupting? We're interrupting the Parshas HaShavua, that you would read, the reading for the fast day instead of the regular, weekday Torah reading. But according to Rabbi Yirmiyah, who says that the the weekly Torah portions remain intact, and you would just go back to the Haftorahs. But then what does it mean that you interrupt for all of these things? Even Tanios and Ma'amados, those are during the week. There's no Haftorah, there's no Torah portions during the week. There's no reading from the Navi during the week. Ve'idach, whereas Rabbi Yirmiyah would reply, Ha'kedisa va'kedisa, that it depends on each thing. During the week we don't read Torah portions. So when we're talking about interrupting for a fast day or for the Maimados, we're talking about Torah portions. However, when we're talking about Parshas HaChodesh and being mafsik, that would just be the Haftorah, as it would be the Navi. Fine. V'ta'anios lomali hafsaka lifret likrei mitzafra. Right. So effective Gemara. When it comes to fast days, why do we have to interrupt anything? Why do we have to interrupt anything? How come on a fast day we can't just read the regular weekly Torah portion, right? If a fast day falls out on a Monday, why can't we just read the Torah portion that we would read that day on a Monday anyways? Likrei mitzafra binyana diyoma. In the morning, just read that week's Torah portion. Uvemincha b'tainisa. And then at Mincha, read the fast day portion. So Maseidah the Rav Huna, so this taka supports Rav Huna, the Amar Rav Huna that says Rav Huna, Mitzafra kinufya, that in the morning they would gather together, and they wouldn't necessarily read the Torah portion. They would only read the Torah portion in the afternoon, and therefore they were only reading it once, and they would read just the fast day portion. Heichi Avdinon, how would they do it? Amar Abai, says Abai, Mitzafra lefalge diyoma, that from the morning until noon, ma'anina b'mile demata, they would just kind of like review the doings and the dealings of the city to kind of figure out, if they're doing everything okay. Mipalge diyoma lefanya riva diyoma, and from noon until sort of for the next quarter of the day, kara umaftere, so then they would read the Torah and from the Navi. V'riva diyoma, and then the next quarter of the day, ba'orachme, they would pray. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, vayikru b'sefer Torah Hashem Elokeim revius hayom, that they read from the Torah for a quarter of the day. Revius misvadim mishtachavim, and for a quarter they would confess and bow down. Ve'epochana. Why didn't I switch it around and say that maybe they would sort of do this confession and reading from the Torah in the morning? Lo salgadaytech, don't say that. Tichsev, as the pasuk says in Sefer Ezra, ve'ele yasvu kochari b'divrei Elokei Yisrael, that everyone would gather, right? Anybody who feared the word of God would gather with me. Al ma'al agola, because of the stuff that the people were doing. Bani Yoshev mishomim ad leminchas ha'erev, and I was just kind of sitting there in silence until the afternoon. And then I got up in the afternoon. So what it means is that they would kind of gather together the first half of the day, and then in the second half of the day they would split it in two. They would read from the Torah and the Haftorah, and then they would sort of like pray and stuff like that. So therefore they were only reading from the Torah once a day on the fast days. All right, well, that was Daf Lamed of Masechta Megillah. We discussed the 4 parshas that we read around Purim time: Parshas Shkolim, Parshas Zohar, Parshas Parah, Parshas HaChodesh. Some interesting machloksin to recollect the machlokis between Rav and Shmuel about what happens when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on a Friday, or Purim falls out on a Friday. Right? Do you read a Parshas Shkolim the Shabbos before or the Shabbos after? Rav says the Shabbos before, Shmuel says the Shabbos after. We then saw an interesting machlokas between Rav Ami and Rabbi Yirmiyah about when these 4 parshas are going on. Do you still continue with the weekly portion or not? So says Reb Ami that during these 4 weeks you don't read the weekly portion at all. You only get back to it and get back on track afterwards. It's probably a lot of double parshas. That stuff is not fun. And says Rabbi Yirmiyah that actually no, the Torah, the weekly Torah portions continue throughout. It's just the maftir and the haftorahs that are different during these 4 weeks. Anyways, friends, that was Daf Lamed, Daf 30 of Masechta Megillah. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.